Welcome. Today's lesson is all about the colon and the em-dash. First, the colon. Colons can introduce a word or a list of words, a phrase or several phrases, or a clause or a list of clauses, and those clauses can be dependent or independent. This introduction generally occurs at the end of a foundational clause, otherwise known as an independent clause. One of the colon's most basic functions is to introduce a single word. Don't forget one of the most important things when driving: steering. Colons also oftentimes introduce a series of words or short phrases. You could hit anything: potholes, trees, stray cats. Sometimes the colon might introduce a single phrase. Anything can jump out at you at any moment, especially stationary mailboxes. And sometimes there might be an additional independent clause introduced by the colon. One thing works when all else fails: make a quick getaway. In the first sentence, the foundational clause is italicized. Don't forget one of the most important things when driving. Now, if you notice the you in parentheses, that's called the understood you. Technically, this is the actor of the independent clause. It's invisible, but we know it's implied. In the next example, the foundational clause is "you could hit anything." Then we have a series of short phrases or words: potholes, trees, stray cats. Oftentimes, a writer would include the conjunction "and" between trees and stray cats. I left it out because I wanted to create a kind of run-on feel. If you want to include the conjunction, you can. If you want to leave it out, it's up to you. Technically, it's all about style and how you want your sentences to sound. The third foundational clause, "anything can jump out at you at any moment," introduces a single phrase, especially stationary mailboxes. And then the fourth foundational clause, "one thing works when all else fails." This foundational clause introduces an additional independent clause. Again, we have the understood you functioning as the actor of the independent clause. You make a quick getaway. Now, I did do one thing different here. I capitalized the word make. I technically didn't have to, but I wanted to because it was kind of like a sentence introducing another sentence. It's ultimately up to you if you want to capitalize it or not. Now, the em-dash also can introduce a series of words, phrases, clauses, or an entirely new independent clause, but it's also more versatile than the colon. It can occur in the middle of a foundational clause or at the end of a foundational clause. The em-dash works really well with those external phrases and clauses that occur in the middle of sentences. The girl, let's call her Julia, loved animals. Her love of animals began innocently: 2 sweet little kittens. The kittens, one black and one gray, grew up. Julia, who could not resist the cuteness of the kittens, needed more. This obsession, it was an obsession, led her down a dark path of no return. Our first sentence is interrupted by the independent clause, "let's call her Julia." The original foundational clause is "the girl loved animals." In the next sentence, the foundational clause, "her love of animals began innocently," that sets up the phrase, "2 sweet little kittens." The next foundational clause, "the kittens grew up," is interrupted by, I guess what you would say, a pair of phrases: one black and one gray. They're kind of treated like two equal adjectives here, interrupting the foundational clause. Then we have a relative clause interrupting the foundational clause, "Julia needed more." Julia, who could not resist the cuteness of the kittens, needed more. Remember, who is the actor, and could resist is the action phrase. Our last sentence, "this obsession, it was an obsession," led her down a dark path of no return. This, of course, is a foundational clause being interrupted by an independent clause. And the em-dash works really well in this case because it allows for that greater interruption, that greater pause. One thing to keep in mind when you're using the colon or the em-dash is that if you're introducing some kind of a list, some kind of series of words, phrases, dependent clauses, it's probably best to maintain some kind of parallel structure. What that means is this: it was an old house, creaky, dilapidated, leaning. Here we have a series of equal adjectives. In the next example, He loved the ocean, the sand, the waves, the sunsets. 3 short phrases, all nouns. The next example, he remembered the valley, the trees swaying in the wind, the birds skipping lightly from branch to branch, and the creek babbling over worn stones. Of course, we have the repeated ing sound in swaying, skipping, and babbling, and that's what creates the parallel structure. In the next example, the old man, dressed in a shabby suit, a startled look on his face, shuffled into the room. Here we have a kind of parallel structure with the ed sound in dressed and the ed sound in startled. And finally, the wind, its howl combing through the trees, creating a ghastly sound, woke the night. Here again we had the repetition of the ing sound, combing through the trees, creating a ghastly sound. Both of those parallel phrases are modifying the howl of the wind. And I know I say it all the time, but don't forget the AAA. You must have the foundation before you can build on it with the colon or the em dash. Thanks for joining me, everybody. See you next time.